All right, sorry about that. I'm supposed to be talking about testing and quality assurance and totally messed that one up. All right. Anyways, so since we didn't have the mic the first time, I'll go ahead and say the little spiel over again. My name is Michael Novotny. I do work for 8-Bit. I am not a native Atlantean like they are. I am from Des Moines, Iowa. So I am one of the remote workers. So what I do back in Iowa, besides farming and all that good stuff, I actually do work for John Deere. I am a front-end developer for them. And for 8-Bit, Tom got into it a little bit with his talk. We are very focused and very sandboxed in our areas of expertise. I am a developer. I do love to code, but that is not necessarily the role that I have with 8-Bit for the majority of what I do. I am very, very detail-oriented and opinionated, so that makes me a good QA person. And I get to oversee all the products and materials that we're about to release. I see them through a QA process, and that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today. I should have went to that slide when I was talking about it, but anyways, testing and troubleshooting WordPress plugins and themes. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is probably going to appear more theme-centric, but the test cases can most certainly work for plugins and whatnot, especially when we get to the data side of things, and we're looking at like how do you display like post titles and things like that, and the different ways that you can break them. That it pertains to plugins if you're having like a popular comments plugin or something like that. So the outline of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about just a couple of quick safeguards that you can do to protect yourself from getting in trouble. Then we're going to talk about some of the tools and the resources that I use for testing. And then we're going to talk through the troubleshooting process that I go through to try to figure out what is going on and going wrong and how we can fix them. So first one is safeguards. This has already received a lot of comments, like little side comments in people's talks while we've been here. And it's always a hot topic on Twitter. But it's jQuery and other default scripts that are included with WordPress. jQuery is the most popular one that everyone knows right off the bat, but there is actually a whole slew. I couldn't even put them all on a slide. There's just so many in the codex of different, whether it's frameworks or scripting languages that are included with WordPress that you can access. But one of the things that I want to talk about in regards to safeguarding yourself is the hot topic is bringing in your own version of jQuery and not using the one that is with WordPress. That, from a quality perspective, is a nightmare. You want to make sure that you are enqueuing properly the jQuery that ships with WordPress, and not trying to do something on your own and bringing in your own version, or deregistering WordPress's version and using your own. It just wreaks all kinds of havoc and can have conflicts, and it gets difficult to try to figure out what's going on. So just please don't do it. That's all I'm going to harp on it. Something else that I just want to briefly mention in safeguards is conditionals. This is a way, there's a whole list of conditionals as well, but if you limit your scripts to only load on the certain pages or screens that are being shown at that time, there is less opportunity for them to cause issues with other scripts that actually need to be on that page. So if you use WordPress conditionals as a way to kind of sandbox your scripts to load in the proper places where they need to, there's just less opportunity for them to cause problems with each other. All right, testing. This is probably the biggest portion of my talk. The first one is kind of a self-interest one. I put together this site over the course of the past couple of days called wptest.io. And what this is, and this just went live this morning, what this is it is an importable, I guess you could say like library or collection of tests for WordPress. And what it'll do is it'll just pre-populate your WordPress site with a whole bunch of mock data that test different testing scenarios. I based it off of the one that is on the theme unit test, the WordPress codex, but we've also paired that with these really oddball, corner case, unique scenarios that we have come up against in the 3 years that we've been doing theme development and plugin development as a team. There's just a lot of crazy, weird things that our customers have found or that we have found, and we've added them all into this little test suite that you can import into your test site and test out your theme and your plugins with these things. So wptest.io is just a good way to get your site populated with data so that you can begin your testing. Plugins that I use in testing. Before we get to the actual ones that we're going to use, what's up on the screen there is what I'm calling setup, and it's whether it's in your local development environment, your staging environment. This is not something that you want to leave in there for your live environment, unless you want to get a whole bunch of pretty errors printing to the screen for your users. But what it does is it essentially adds all these flags to WordPress to say, I want to see everything that's going wrong, and so that I can address it and fix it. And so if you have these 4 flags set, that will begin the collection process in WordPress's mind to say, I need to start showing these to you. And I'll go ahead and pause right here for a second and say that I will have all these slides up on my website. I will have links to the resources and the codex pages that I have for this, so if you're feverishly trying to write down these different parameters and stuff, you don't have to worry about doing that. So the first plugin I want to talk about is Debug Bar. This is a plugin that has come into popularity lately in the testing part of WordPress. It is this plugin adds a panel or a screen on both the admin and the front end facing part of the site. And if we go to an example here, you'll notice up at the top, whenever something is going wrong with your page, again, whether it's the admin or the front side, that little debug square up at the top will turn red instead of just being a black, blending in with the rest of the bar. And then if you click on that and you open it up, it gives you these different panels down the left-hand side, but it also displays what's going wrong in your page, and that way you can address it and see what's going on. Debug Bar is kind of the base, and then there is a slew of other add-ons that people have started coming up with to go way deeper into the debugging process. I just listed out the ones that I have used from time to time. I don't use all of these on a regular basis, but an incredible library of plugins to add on top of the debug bar to help you understand what's going wrong. Log deprecated notices. This plugin's been around for quite a while. It was just recently updated to 3.6 standards, I believe, even though it's not out yet. What this does, and in our example here, is it tucks in a little menu underneath your tools area, and it begins to log different calls in your plugins and your themes that you're using currently that have been or are going to be deprecated in the current release or the next release. So you can begin to recognize the pieces of code that need to change and need to be brought up to more modern standards. Depending on what those functions are, you might have to do some conditional checking to determine, if you want to go back and support, way older versions of WordPress, then you'll have to start stacking up your code to use conditional or to use some of those functions that, even though they're deprecated, you still want to support all those older versions of WordPress that your users might have. So this isn't like an alarming thing, it's more of an awareness, because if you want to still use those older functions, those notices will still show up here, and you can just kind of cross it off your mental list. Theme check is another plugin that when run against your theme specifically, it prints out this whole list of warnings, recommendations, just take a quick little glance at this and let you know kind of best practices, I guess you could say. We use this one. We've been using this one for quite a while. Like the log deprecated notices plugin, this one sometimes spits out false positives, I guess is the best way that I could say it. Sometimes it says that the tags that you're using in your style CSS aren't legitimate tags, and they might be. Sometimes it says that you might be printing out an iframe, but it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with a YouTube, embed that's just there. So you kind of have to work your way through that log to figure out what's real and applicable to your development process and which ones are not. Theme Mentor is a newer one that I just found, and as it says in its description, it is a cousin to the theme checker plugin. And what this one does is it goes above and beyond what that theme check plugin does, and it actually goes back to what I started this talk about with jQuery. It'll make sure that your theme or your plugin is not trying to deregister jQuery. And I think that's actually a hot topic that it might make its way into core to make sure that you can't deregister without some very explicit parameters in place. So just wanted to mention that this one sits kind of on top of theme check. It's kind of new to me. I don't have an example screen for you for that one, but I wanted to mention it. RTL Tester. This one is a fun one, and depending on how far you want to go with the support of your plugin or theme, this little guy helps you come up with your RTL CSS. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, we here in America read left to right. Other countries across the sea read right to left. And so what this plugin does is it actually puts your theme or your plugin into that perspective. And it kind of gives you a starting point to begin rewriting an RTL CSS, which can be included at the root of your theme or as a part of your plugin to help it read right to left. So this is something that we use in our testing process to flesh out those issues. I wanted to give a quick note to Slim Jetpack. As a part of our development process, we do like to add support for some of the newer Jetpack features that come out. Things like infinite scroll, things like tiled galleries, stuff like that. Slim Jetpack is Jetpack, but without the necessary step of connecting to WordPress.com to begin using it. So especially in your local development and your staging environments or whatever, before you go live, you don't need to connect to WordPress.com. You don't need that extra hassle. This just kind of removes that layer, and it gives you just a nice, and I think it actually, when I was using it for a site last night, it starts with everything off instead of the assumed values of on for most things, so that you can only turn on the pieces that you need. Also, I guess you could, if you wanted to use it in a live environment, if you didn't want to connect to something like WordPress stats or something like that, but still want all the other functionality of Jetpack. Okay, troubleshooting. You will at one point in time be bit by browser cache. This is just one of those little mental notes as a reminder. If you're just refreshing your page feverishly, knowing full well that you changed the CSS or the JavaScript and it's just not there, this is probably what's holding you up. Chrome tends to be more forgiving in this, especially if you do a hard refresh, which is instead of a Command or Control R, it's a Command and Control Shift R. That will usually take care of clearing out not seeing your changes, but you might have to, like in the screenshot here, go into the settings of whatever browser you use and clear that cache manually. This is a flow that we have gotten into at 8-bit when we're trying to determine what is going wrong when we're doing support for users, and also what's going wrong when we're testing something before it goes out to release. It's kind of a tiered step or a hierarchy of what we do to figure out what's going wrong. Just because there's so many possible combinations with all the different plugins, all the different hosting environments, It's just you got to start a fine process of elimination to get through it. So what we usually do is we first say, let's eliminate all the plugins. Let's deactivate them so that they're not a part of the stack, and let's see where that gets us. If the issue still persists, then we switch over to one of the default themes like 2011, 2012, to see if it is a theme issue or if it's a consistent issue across multiple themes. If you get that far down in the stack, then you usually know that you're at a core WordPress issue or something that I put on the slide, a server hosting configuration PHP type of issue. So this is just kind of the walking down the chain process that we use internally to determine where to start looking for the root cause of the problem. Chrome developer tools. This could be an entire talk all on its own. We're not going to go that deep by any means. We're going to take a look here over the next couple of slides to show some key highlight areas that can help you out. But developers just getting started, or users who are just wanting to start to get into WordPress development, or enthusiasts or whatnot, this is kind of like the missing piece of the puzzle that just unlocks them and gets them the freedom to experiment without having to flip through multiple windows and figure out what's going wrong. So we'll take a look at a couple screens here. The first one is just how to get to Chrome developer tools. It's up there in your file menu, but most often than not, you will just right-click anywhere on the page, bring up your right-click menu, and at the bottom there will be a little selection there that says Inspect Element. And when you do that, whoop, wrong way. When you do that, it'll by default slide up from the bottom. I have mine docked to the right, but it'll bring open this whole other panel on the right. And what you'll see is that you have a column of CSS that is being applied to the specific element that you have selected. And you can also see that as you hover and as you have that selected, that it's drawing a box. It's kind of hard to tell on the screen, but there's a blue overlay showing you what you have selected and what the area it is that it's taking up. And this is the part that if you haven't used it before, that just kind of blows your mind. But all of this is live and editable. So if you just want to, instead of going back and forth trying to say, should this button be 30 pixels wide? Should it be 50 pixels wide? Should it be 75? You just go in here without having to flip back and forth between your IDE and your browser, and you just change these values by clicking in here. You can change class names. You can delete entire chunks of code. It's all live editable, and as soon as you hit refresh again, it all comes back. So it's a good way to experiment and just play and mess around to get you to where you're going quicker. And in the debugging process, you can see how the order of the CSS here is loading and why these ones are crossed out and getting overridden by these other ones that are more explicit or loaded later on in the CSS stack. There's another tab inside. I should have pointed that out. There's these different tabs across the top here. This is the Sources tab. And what you can do is you can pop open this little side panel using this little guy here, and you can look at all the CSS and JavaScript files that are in your theme or plugin. And again, you can set, from here, you can set breakpoints. You can change values in call responses. You can actually live edit your CSS freeform in this way. It is a really powerful way to, again, live debug, live edit to determine what is going wrong. I don't want to go into too much details in the console. It is very popular. It is, and I'm sorry, it's not. It's very popular amongst really hardcore developers because it is essentially a terminal in your browser. But what I wanted just to point out here for this session is if something is not going right, an image isn't loading, your CSS isn't loading right, your plugin isn't, or theme isn't working right, functionality-wise with JavaScript, go to the console and just look to see if there's errors. You might not know how to address it. You might have to do some digging. to figure out what's going on, but this is like your first stop to say, okay, is there anything that is holding me up and from having this work as it should? And it will print out those errors where it can't load something, or you have you tried to use a variable before it was undefined in your JavaScript and it's blowing up. That kind of stuff will show up in here. All right, cross-browser and device testing. This has gotten significantly more complicated with all the different range of mobile devices, tablets, different size computers. Now we have Retina computers. So it's just this huge landscape of different places that you need to test. There are a lot, this first one here, there's a lot of viewport resizers that essentially, you can move your browser back and forth, but these viewport resizers will simulate actual sizes and dimensions. And this one in particular I found to be the most useful of them all, because you can set up specific devices in your bookmark to navigate to and use. And it also is the only one that I have found that usually when you load a site that is not responsive on your phone, it's zoomed all the way out. Most of the other tools that I've used, it still shows up super duper big, so it doesn't give you an accurate view. So viewport resizer, this is what it looks like in live action. It essentially drops this little thing down from the top that is your different device selector, and then it kind of grows and shrinks this area in between to show you what it would look like in these different landscapes and mobile devices.
It should also be noted on the resizer, it doesn't necessarily do the device header correctly.
Yes, not all of them do. That is a very good point to make. I cannot speak to whether or not this one does or does not. Okay, but what, like I said, this one in particular I found helpful because it actually did do the viewport resizing correctly, and most of them do not. But again, that is just like the quick stopgap check. The next thing I wanted to talk about, the next best thing that you can get to testing all these different devices without having to own all these different devices that I have found and that I use and that 8-Bit uses is Browser Stack. And what this is they've built this service that it runs all these different simulators and all these different OSs and all these different environments, and you can load your website up and debug what is going on and what it looks like to a very, very detailed view. So I mean, here's an example. Loaded up a site. I selected Windows 7. I selected IE8. There's a connection screen that comes up. It boots up this virtual environment for you, and then it displays it for you on your screen. It's not just a display. It's not just a screenshot. It is fully live, and you can interact with it. They also install the best thing that they can on all these different browsers, Firebug Lite, which gives you that same kind of debugging capability that Chrome Developer Tools has that I showed you. Not as capable, but good enough to figure out most issues that you're experiencing. Love this service, can't say enough about them. No, I am not paid by them. So I went through a lot of different things there and pointed out a lot of different services and plugins and things that we use to help troubleshoot the different issues that come up, rather than try to draw it out or to go into any more detail with those. I guess I would just end it here and just leave it as an open forum if you guys have any specific questions about testing. Yeah?
When you were talking about troubleshooting back to 2020,
yes.
How do you do that without destroying all the widgets and menus and everything?
That is a very good question. And for those of you who don't know the background to what he's talking about, when you switch themes back and forth in the admin, they keep a memory of what widgets you have active. So if you have 2011 and you activate the search in the sidebar, and then you flip over to 2012, that search will be gone and you'll have to add it back. That's a good question. I don't, unless somebody else has something that they'd like to bring up, I just usually drag it back over. I usually try to keep the sidebar pretty clean so that when we're done testing something, I'll empty it out and just put something back by default to at least take up the space. Yeah.
What were some of the oddball scenarios that you mentioned in the test that you created?
Jared loves this one. Super duper long text or non-breaking text. So on a developer site, if you have this long path name to a file that doesn't have any spaces in it, very rarely are themes and plugins accounting for that text not breaking. If there's no place for it to break, you have to explicitly tell it in CSS to go ahead and break anyway when it runs out of space. But that's not very common and not very addressed across a lot of themes. Some of the other oddball ones, special characters in post titles, HTML in post titles. WordPress doesn't support a lot, but they support EM, strong. They can do weird things depending on what you're doing with your theme or your plugin. Those are just a couple that I would throw out. But if you go to that wptest.io, there is a live demo and you can see all the different scenarios that we've outlined. We'll go with the lady in the green first.
You mentioned Chrome and the Chrome developer tool.
Yes.
I've heard that from a lot of the developers. How does that compare to Firefox and Firebug?
That is a great question, because our teammate Jared got asked that same thing yesterday. I used to be an avid Firefox user, mostly because of the whole Firefox-Firebug combination. Somewhere at some point in time, I can't even give you a version number, Firefox started to get really slow, at least in my opinion. And with their quicker iterations and the way that they have changed how they do their built-in development or developer tools for their browser, it's not as highly interactive as Chrome is. You can't go in and as easily live edit on the fly in your CSS or JavaScript files. So with the speed and with the accessibility to the quickness of editing, just kind of made the jump to Chrome because it does, unless it's just a perceived thing, feels much faster and performs much faster for me.
Breakpointing too.
Yeah, and breakpointing, which I don't know if Firebug does or not. I forget. You got a question?
Yeah, you mentioned deregistering jQuery, and maybe I need to be enlightened because I read lots of stuff that's talking about deregistering jQuery and using the CDN version, re-registering it back, and maybe even re-registering it in the footer instead of the header.
No, that's a good question. WordPress ships with it included, and WordPress is tested with the version that it is shipped with. If the link that you're using for the CDN doesn't target a specific version, or it is which means that as they update it to newer versions, it just automatically updates for you, or if it's using a different version than what WordPress is using, it just allows this backdoor opportunity for untested scenarios to happen. I honestly have not come across a legitimate reason to deregister jQuery and not use what comes with WordPress. As far as a CDN, I mean, I understand that you're saving the bandwidth, but I mean, how much are you saving on a minified JavaScript version of jQuery? A few hundred?
Bigger, I mean, jQuery is a decent size, and loading it in the head is just stuff I read says always put JavaScripts in the footer.
Yep, Tom, I mean, you might be able to answer this one. Can you specify when you enqueue the included version of JavaScript or of jQuery to put it down in the footer if you want it to?
Yes, you can specify to move jQuery in the footer. You can, and there's a lot of practices out there that say to move your JavaScript into the footer. But if you look at 99.99% of your websites, no one's doing that. And the danger that you get into doing that, especially in WordPress, is that first you need to think about WordPress as an entire application, whereas jQuery is a component of it. And if you're going to move, if you're going to change versions or move where it's loading, you're changing the way your application functions. Plugin developers and theme developers are normally banking on jQuery being loaded, a specific version, and it being the first thing loaded. If you change it, you're going to possibly break not every, but the majority of good practices that plugin developers and theme developers have put in. To the point about the size of it, I oftentimes, this may make me sound ignorant, but I ignore that argument because how many of us are on bandwidth, or high bandwidth connections these days, and we're talking about a few kilobytes. If you're on a dial-up connection, if you're on an isolated area out in the country, I can see that. But if you're in a city, if you're in even the suburbia, you're talking about seconds that humans may not even be able to really feel. And so that's why those are the main reasons that I say leave jQuery alone when it comes into changing its order. So some of those articles I think are written because in theory it sounds good, but in practice it can have catastrophic results.
I mean, I have a beef with plugin developers that don't give you a switch to, they load their own CSS file, and they load their own script files and stuff, and don't give you a switch to say, I don't want you to load those things. I want to include the CSS in my own CSS file.
Yeah, and that's
And deregister the script that they're loading and register their script after jQuery in the footer.
That is, your beef is valid.
Just because they're doing it wrong, if you run it's going to tell you move your jQuery down. It's just sort of best practice.
But if you move jQuery down and then the plugin developers that have their jQuery have their code loaded in the head, their JavaScript won't work.
So then you have to deregister their script and re-register it.
I'm going to stop you guys there, and you guys can take it offline. The only
We'll set up a formal debate.
Yeah. The only thing that I will have input on with that is I recently had an opportunity to talk or to listen to a talk by Uncle Bob. If you guys don't know him, he's all about coding standards. He's all about conventions and clean code and following a process to get you to where you need to go. And what he always says to that is that conventions and best practices are more important than common sense. And even though you might disagree or have a beef with it or want to go against that, the best practices is to use the jQuery that comes with WordPress and to use it where it should be placed, which from what Tom says sounds like up in the header. Yeah?
I've had problems with plugins loading JavaScript and then breaking other plugins. What's going on there?
jQuery here is probably a good example. Another common example is they're wanting to interact with the same element. Maybe one plugin, the one that's loaded first, removes it, moves it, changes it, puts it in some form that is unexpected by the subsequent plugin that loads, and it just doesn't understand.
So they're not probably following best practices with that plugin.
Not following best practices. Sometimes it just happens. It just is a fluke combination of the two that you're using. It might sound arbitrary to say that, but it can really just come down to that. Minification is something else. If you have minified JavaScript, and we ran into this recently too, and it's just part of us being transparent. You miss a semicolon and a minification, and you get two JavaScript or jQuery chains put together. You're going to get some really weird, unexpected results. So there's a couple different. Those are probably the three biggest reasons that I would see it causing conflict with each other.
I was just going to point out, for some people that want to test on iPad and iPhone and have it native, Xcode, if you're on a Mac, actually has that included and it works just like the device.
Yep.
The only trouble is it's harder to really debug the code that you see on it, but you can see like kind of.
And what I'll say to that, and he brings up a good point, and in case anybody didn't hear him, if you have a Mac and you want to debug on an iPad or an iPhone, you can download Xcode for free. You can launch the simulators. The newer feature that came out, if you have Safari 6, is you can actually open up if you open up Safari, open up the simulator and put them side by side, you can from the Safari developer menu say, I want to connect to the iPhone simulator, and then just like Chrome developer tools, you can open up Safari's developer tools and hover over, just like in Chrome developer tools, and it draws the boxes and shows you, and you can live edit the CSS. Same thing.
I didn't know I did that. That's cool.
That is, that's a newer feature in iOS 6. I'm gonna go over here. I cheat over this way. That's kind of how I look. Yeah.
Yeah, this is going back to like the plugins that you mentioned about debugging. What's the advantage of using one of those debugging plugins versus you talked about like the WP debug? I guess that's a file or
Yeah. So we're talking about the WP test stuff that I put together on that website. It's importable data. So we're talking about simulated posts, simulated pages, categories. That export now comes with like menu navigation and all that stuff. So we've set up these different scenarios. You could import it on a live site if you have a way to maybe block it, or you don't care if people see it while you're putting it together. It's really meant to be used in more of a local development or staging environment to flush out those issues in advance, but that's the data side of things. All the other plugins that I mentioned after that help you diagnose what is going wrong with that data. So they work in tandem to each other. You can most certainly come up with your own data. We did it for years. Over the past week or two, when I was putting together that site and putting that package together, I had mental notes of splintered test cases across multiple versions of stuff that we had, and finally just got to a point where we're doing side projects and I have team members that want access to that same data, and I'm like, well, you can go get this test case here and here and here, and we just put it all into one place. Yes?
Yeah, question for you. I have a friend that uses Safari, and it obviously, like you said, had the debugging tools. Is there a difference? I know they have the same parent WebKit, but are the tool sets basically the same from Safari?
Between those two, they are very, very similar. Safari lacks the live. When you have the CSS panel open and the HTML panel open, you can modify those values inside of there. But if you want to open up those source files and live edit them on the fly, Safari doesn't support that live editing.
My project manager's approach to QA and testing is click all the things and hope it doesn't, that's about it. Obviously there's a lot of room for more rigorous testing and systematic stuff. But getting her started on that is going to be tough. Where would you start with making a case for QA and more rigorous?
And this is, so a lot of what I talked about here is obviously manual, stuff that we're going through whenever we come out with a next major release to test what we're going against. To be perfectly honest, I'm just getting into the whole TDD, test-driven design type of stuff, unit tests, the whole automated portion of this. I don't know if you wrote them, but I know that WP Tuts has unit test posts out there on how to get started with that type of stuff. And I actually think that there's a guy later on this afternoon, I might be wrong with his name, but I think Reed is going to get more into that automated portion of this same kind of talk.
In PHP, there's a thing called PHP unit for unit testing.
Yes.
And the guy that created it is going to be here on the 27th, speaking at the Atlanta PHP.
What's that?
25th.
25th, sorry about that. I was just going to ask if you were here. Yeah, sorry, the 25th, Monday the 25th.
That would be something that I would be interested in if I wasn't 900 miles away. But if you're here, that would be a really great thing to probably come and hear about. Yes?
I just want to comment when you recommended the Slim Jetpack plugin.
Yes.
Being able to work without the connection to .com. I would actually recommend against that now that you can activate the dev mode from the actual Jetpack plugin. That way you can still get security updates. And stuff
Awesome.
like that.
I had no idea that the dev mode even existed.
If you go to the plugin page, there's now a tab for developers. And
Okay.
stuff, Matt just asked me to pass that on. So.
Fantastic. There you go. Yes.
I just want to mention, you talked about caching.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually turn caching off in the developer tools.
Yes, I believe down in the little gear
Yes.
there. I've had pretty good success, but I've still had a couple times where I think I've been bitten by it for sure.
I usually do that in a different browser than the one I use. So Canary, I'll turn off the Canary and
Yeah.
on
And going back to the Firefox comment, there's actually a really good plugin or an extension or add-on, whatever browser you use, whatever they want to call it. Firefox has one called Web Developer Tool, I think is what it is, or Web Developer Toolbar. And it's actually for Chrome and Safari too, but Firefox is the only one where it has the checkbox to permanently disable cache. So you're always seeing the latest, greatest changes and never getting bit by that browser cache. I've had great success with that when I was a Firefox user. Anything else?
I don't know if this helps, but if you have the developer tools open, if you hold down the refresh button, there's 3 refresh options.
Okay.
And one is,
I didn't know that one either.
yeah, but you have to have the developer window open.
Yeah.
to have those.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I didn't know that. And there's so many things in that, and they release updates to that developer tools all the time too. So thanks for mentioning that.
And the network tab's nice too, to see when things are loaded too.
Yep, and the loader they were ordered in, and if any script or file is taking too long to load. I didn't know how deep we wanted to go here. Like I said, that could be a whole nother talk just to use and understand everything that's going on there. Okay, thank you very much.